Chris, we're here around the silos today. One of the things we want to talk about is fumigation timing, and the question we get quite regularly is when should we actually be fuming, and that's pretty important to make sure this stuff's effective.
Yeah, there's a few different strategies for fumigation timing in terms of when we might fumigate, and the main ones that we see are a pre-emptive after harvest, just in case, or a on detection if we find insects, or the third one, if we can't get to the top of the silo, is just by the calendar.
Yeah, so we're just looking at a particular date and saying, righto, well, this is the time we need to fumigate after filling the silo.
Yep.
Chris, one thing that's absolutely essential, no matter which one of those approaches we're taking, is that we're fumigating in a gas-tight sealable silo.
Yep.
And we need to make sure that that is pressure tested and that we're actually going to contain the fumigant that we put in there.
If we're doing repeat fumigations, maybe by the calendar, in anything less than gas type, that's how we get resistance pretty quickly. So let's talk about the preemptive, so after harvest fumigation. Probably the first thing I'd suggest there is don't do it too soon after harvest. The risk is that we seal the silo up and lock in all that harvest heat. There's a risk that we end up with condensation in the silo. So if we don't have aeration, at least ideally a month or so to let that harvest heat out a bit. If we do have aeration cooling, I'd suggest cooling the grain down to 20, 25 degrees, a much safer place for storage. Do your fumigation then, and when you finish your fumigation, return to aeration cooling down to 15 degrees, and there should be no reason for insects to reinfest.
And that period of time just helps us get the moisture profile in the stack a little bit more uniform, doesn't it?
Yeah, lot safer storage.
Yeah. Okay, so if we look at, that's for a preemptive approach. What about the on detection? I mean, we're using something like a probe trap like we've got here, or a 2mm sieve where we've gathered some grain from the silo and we've found some insects. What's the approach then?
Obviously, if we can detect insects, we can fumigate as we need. Combined with monitoring grain temperature will tell us how quickly the insect's life cycle will be, so how much time we've got before we need to do a fumigation.
And ideally, I mean, these probe traps normally placed in the top of the silo. The sieves, we can take samples from the top and the bottom.
Yep. To
get an idea of whether there's insects in that grain stack or not. All right, and the last one you mentioned before was just purely on calendar timing. I mean, there are instances where we can't get to the top of the silo. We might be able to take a bit of grain out of the bottom, but in that circumstance, we're just going to run by the calendar month and work that way. Is that the best way to do it?
That's it. Unfortunately, some silos have been purchased or built without a way to safely access the top, and so there's no way to check for insects at the top, and so people revert to fumigating on a regular basis by the calendar. But certainly don't want to fumigate and leave the silo locked up. Again, we find ourselves in the risk of having condensation in that headspace, and we also create a really long venting period at the end of the fumigation if we've left it locked up for an extended period.
That's right, and that adds to the risk of getting moisture in that headspace. Because I suppose the most important thing, I think, is really working backwards from what the buyer requires. If we're due to deliver grain on a given date, we know that we have to fumigate it prior to delivery. That can happen with some buyers. It might be the point that we've got to actually fumigate at a set date, give ourselves enough time according to the label for both the fumigation, the ventilation, and then a withholding period.
Yeah, it's essentially what the buyer requires.
So in summary, really, Chris, there's a few different approaches when it comes to fumigation timing, and our strategy can vary according to our requirements, and certainly the market requirements and the buyer requirements.
I think it's understanding the strategy that suits your system and the purpose of each one. For more information,
go to storedgrain.com.au or give one of the team a call on 1800 Weevil, that's 1800 933 845.